Paul, thank you very much again for part two of our Q&A. Got an interesting question from Tony Anskoff. Where do you see the live event industry heading over the next few years, bearing in mind how we've had a year of not touring and the effect of Brexit and bands touring?
I think it's going to be a pretty bumpy road for people, English musicians, trying to get from here to Europe. I think that the agreement, the so-called free trade oven-ready agreement that Boris trumpeted, is nothing of the sort. And at the moment, I'm involved with the UK Music Live group, and the problems are going to be significant, both in terms of availability of things like Arctics and buses,
right,
and UK operators having to relocate to Europe on the advice from the Department of Trade and Industry, because that is the only way to get around the problems of getting from Dover or Harwich into Europe. And also the issues with some countries asking for visas and extra costs or work permits, and at the moment, it's almost impossible to take a UK registered self-drive splitter van with you, the band, and gear in the back with CDs and merch. It's impossible to take that into Europe as it stands. You can't at the moment, and I don't know if this is going to change, have a transit van with a band in it and take commercial gear with it at the same time. So you have to, if it's commercial goods, they have to travel in a separate vehicle, which is purely for commercial goods only. It's not been well thought through. It won't come as any surprise to people, I suspect, that those people negotiating Brexit basically didn't really know what they were talking about in a large extent, and we spent more time and effort and money on 12,000 people who work in the fishing industry than 300,000 people who work in entertainment. But that's, that's a political rabbit hole, which is probably a separate podcast on its own.
Yeah, I reckon so, yeah. Julian?
I think for big bands, they'll find a way around it, because you can always throw money at it to make it work, but it's going to be problematic for small to medium bands for sure.
But obviously, from what you're saying, having an overseas, or let's say a base in Europe for the same company seems to be...
Yeah, which seems nuts. It's not very good for the exchequer, I wouldn't have thought, but what do I know?
Julian Papandrea wanted to know, how did the collaboration with Larry Dunn and Verdine White come about?
Well, that was before my time. I think that came through I think it came through Waddy Battery.
Really? Okay.
I think so. I'm not sure. You'd have to ask Mike or Phil or Mark about that, because I can't. That was definitely before my time, because that was on the album. With Kansas City Milkman on it, funnily enough, I think, wasn't
it? With you on the vocals.
Yeah, not on the recorded version, sadly.
Chris Griffiths wanted to know how... Oh, I've done that. How did Level 42 become the house band? Done that in the previous one. What David Shan wanted to know, which was your favourite Level 42 album or single?
I would say... Oh, that's interesting. My favourite track is Kansas City Milkman, only because I've managed to sing on it live on stage at least 3 times. My favourite album would, funny enough, would probably be World Machine, because that was the first one for me.
But involved with, right, okay.
And I think it was also, it was a step change for them, that they went from being this, pretty big in the UK to being massive in the UK, and then big in Europe, and like I say, it was the start of the journey. So for me, it would probably be that one.
Okay, again, we may have covered this question in the first part, but Peter Houghton and Des Lynch wanted to know, is it true that you promised Mark to be the richest bass player in the world?
We cemented the deal definitely after a few drinks. I went down to his house at the time. He was living in just off of Tooting Common, and we shook hands over the dining room table, and I said, "I'll make you a millionaire before you're 30." and we did it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just a bold kind of manager's
Right.
style.
Yeah, I'm going to
But
take you to the top.
I honestly thought that it was achievable, because I felt that they had underperformed. I just felt that they had it in them to be. They were so good live. I couldn't see it not working.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even if they only became one of the biggest sort of live attractions, it was always going to be that, you know, that I knew I could make a difference.
Excellent. As I said, well, I can't remember if I said this before, but having seen them 65 times, the live part is obviously what I've followed them for, and lots of other fans, because they're so energetic on stage.
Absolutely.
Kev Dalton wanted to know, were Level 42, very interesting, were ever Level 42 ever asked to submit a theme tune to the James Bond?
Never.
Never.
Not
Okay.
in my time, no.
Okay. Peter Wessel from Copenhagen and Steve Wiltshire wanted to know, why didn't you like the Running in the Family album? And there must have been a quote of some sort for that.
That was in the documentary where I actually said,
Right.
you know, I didn't like it, but now it's sold so many records, it's my favorite album, or something like that. I don't know. I just didn't. When I first heard it, it's often the case. It's very hard sometimes to be objective when you're as intimately and closely involved with an artist as I was. It's hard to know sometimes when you first hear a record. Obviously you're listening to it with completely fresh ears, and you're thinking, is this going to be commercially successful? Is it going to get on the radio? Blah blah blah. And I think that there was a huge pressure on that record because World Machine had been so successful, and there was huge pressure from the label that then it had to take another step up. And I was not convinced. You know, it's a matter of public record. I didn't. You know.
Very odd. Right, hopefully I'll piece together.
Yeah, so I think it. You know, when I first heard it, I didn't like it. But you know, it's. I also qualify that with the fact that I'm not very musical. You know, I'm not a musician, and I was never one of those managers like Roger Davis was for Tina Turner, where he'd go out and he'd pick the songs with her and for her, and get heavily involved and stuff like that. I was always more in the Peter Grant mold from Led Zeppelin. You know, that was you know, I just got the business done, and I turned. You know, you were turning the art into commerce, is what, you know, kind of.
Yeah, of course, which was what your job was, really, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was my honest opinion, and you know, if nothing else, I would normally give, even when it was deeply not required, and certainly not very well received, I would always give an honest opinion.
Mm-hmm. Jeff Francis wanted to know, where do you think the band would be without the hits?
Yeah, I think they'd be now. I don't think they'd exist if they hadn't had the hits, because the hits, if you don't have the hits, you don't get the money. It doesn't keep going. You know, and I think that by the time I got involved, they'd already, if you like, run up against a feeling of being on doing the same things, the same time, and they were bored. You know, it's like, one quote from Mark was, I only even know what year it is because we've done, like, you know, I know how many shows we've done at Hammersmith, you know.
Right.
You know, we do two, we started off doing one, then we did two, then we did three, then we did four. And it was like, and it wasn't really, it was getting bigger, but it was a much slower process. And it was physically very demanding. I mean, the shows are very demanding anyway, whatever you're doing, even if you're just standing there with a guitar over you and not moving. But you know, if you're Mark and the band, you know, it was a very energetic show. We were all over the place. It was very, very physical. And I think they would not be still going now, or if they were, it would be very low rent and low threshold. They wouldn't be doing what they do.
No, still going 40 years on. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bernard O'Toole said, after Staring in the Sun, it seemed that the band's popularity declined. Was there a brainstorming session, or was there tension? And was there tension when they changed record labels?
There definitely was tension when we changed record labels, and that was to do with when they recorded Guaranteed, the label Polydor they wanted more. They didn't like it. They wanted us to go back, wanted the band to go back and record more. And at the time, I'd negotiated a clause in the contract which said that they couldn't do that. That basically, if the album, whatever the album was, they had to put it out. They refused. That led to a big dispute. We ended up signing to RCA then, as it was, and settling an agreement with Polydor to leave. And I think that after that, it was a bit more difficult. And I think that, again, you end up, sometimes you're a band of your moment. It doesn't matter how much good stuff you write thereafter. Your fans have grown up with you. Some of them have stayed with you, like you, but some come for the hits and then they're not invested in it. Maybe they've seen one or two shows and then they've moved on to other things. And also that the radio landscape changes, other music comes along, people get into other stuff. And it's you've got to keep sustaining that hit after hit after hit in order to maintain that. Was there a brainstorm? Yeah, there was lots of brainstorming sessions. Nobody wants to be in a position where you're looking at a decline. But I think that when Mark stopped after Guaranteed, after Forever Now, when he stopped, what was the last album, Julian? Was it Forever Now or Guaranteed?
Forever Now would have been about about 87, 88, something like that.
Terrible. Whatever one it was, anyway. I think that he unusually for an artist could see the writing on the wall at that time that it didn't matter what they did, they were not as popular, and it was going to be a managed decline. And I think that he didn't want it to be like that. So when they did that last show at the Albert Hall and they quit, I think his quote to me was, "I don't want to be the status quo of jazz funk."
Right.
And which I kind of got, and like I said, it was unusually perceptive as a musician to know when it's time to quit, because musicians are often like boxers, they're not necessarily punch drunk, but they certainly they don't really know when to stop. So I think that they were firm. He was firm about that, and I think he only restarted once he'd done the solo thing for a bit, and I think he sort of made peace with the fact that he wasn't necessarily going to be putting out a load of new music, but he still loved playing those songs, and essentially that's who he was. He was the front man, the main writer, and the star of Level 42, as is evidenced by the fact that he's still doing stuff now, and they're still headlining festivals here and doing enormous tours, and long may it continue.
Yeah, Philippe Hartman, who's from Quebec, said, how significant was Polydor's role in promoting the band?
Yeah, very. They like a lot of major labels, they spent a lot of money. So paying for videos, paying for PR people, paying for radio pluggers to go to radio, and that was on a global scale. So that happened in America, that happened in Holland. Each of those territories had their own Polydor or subsection of Polydor, and they put a lot of effort in, a lot of money in, and that's also what made it. So you've got to start with, you've got to have the hardcore talent and the hardcore music first, because without that it doesn't matter. But if you've got that and a label gets behind it, and it still happens to this day, you see them turn success in one territory into global success because they just throw a lot of money at it, and the music feeds off of that, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Paul Nyman wanted to know, what was your vision when with the band when you took over from John?
it was a joint thing between Mark and I, and it was to do with looking smart. So that's when they started to wear suits on stage.
Okay.
The photo sessions were a bit more, studied. They were, the idea was to look the part. We were looked successful, so we became successful. It's a bit like when you look at the video for Something About You. That whole thing that was a big improvement on videos that had come before. The whole thing about having Sherry Lungi in it, who was at the time was quite a high-profile actress. It was a big, major statement to take it from where it was to another level, and that was very much the plan. The plan was, we're going to go out there, we're going to look like we're going to wear Rolexes, and we're going to wear smart suits, and we're going to look the dog's bollocks, and people will think that we are, and we can back it up, because if we get them to come to a live show, we're going to get them converted. And that was
absolutely,
yeah.
Yeah, funny enough, I've got a poster on my wall that has the Levi's advert on it, and I must admit, I discussed that with Phil, and he wasn't fussed about that in the slightest. So, again, were you involved in that decision to have?
He seemed to be quite happy to take the money and the jeans at the time. I think that that was Mark embraced that wholeheartedly. We got paid quite a bit of money for that, which everybody was quite happy to have, and it was. I thought, funny enough, of all the sponsor deals that I see, and I see a lot, that was quite a cool thing to be associated with. It wasn't like we were associated with, Lada cars or Woolworth's greatest hits or anything like that. It was a very cool thing to be involved in, and everybody loved it, and it worked. So for me, looking at it with my manager's hat on, it was kind of the perfect thing. Mark loved it, because every day on stage he'd say, and wearing a pair of black 501s is boom cool. But I think that was, that right there, I suspect, is probably the difference between Phil and I.
Right, interesting, very interesting. David Chan, did I do that? Yeah, he said that Lessons in Love got to number 3. Is there anything else you think you could have done to have got it to number 1?
No.
Everything was thrown at it.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's it's just one of those things.
I suppose also that it's just dependent on who is at top at the time as well, isn't it? That week,
I can't remember who it was that was 1 and 2. I'm sure I could find it, but as you say, you do what you do. You maximise your sales, but in the charts, you're always at the mercy of somebody else selling more.
Of course, yeah. Right, I've got the last thing I've got. A guy called James Callaghan wants to thank you for something you did many, many years ago. He said he sent you a goddamn awful demo that he knows was goddamn awful, but you actually replied extremely positively, and he thanked you for it.
Well, again, it was back to, I always thought, unless it's really, really, really bad, I would always respond if I could, because I always knew that it had come from a good place. Right. Even if it was terribly bad, it was the best that he could do at the time. And also I thought, you can kind of try and be you don't want to encourage, because clearly there's absolutely, the fact that I've never heard of him again clearly means I was right, that there's no compelling artistic reason why he's going to make it. But, I know what it's like if you're sitting there waiting for something to come through the letterbox, and often I always do that with job applications. You always respond to everybody, even if it's a no.
Right.
I always do that with every letter that we get in the office. We always respond to. Please don't send a load of letters. But that was always the thing, because it was it was polite. I thought it was polite to do.
Excellent. Paul, first of all, I've got to say thank you for doing this interview. Obviously, we've covered quite a lot of ground there. I know, like I said to both Phil and Mike, you guys don't have to do this, but 40 years. So when did I would have met you first? Probably about 1984 then? 85, wasn't it, when you took over?
Yeah. But I might have met you before on a show, Julian.
Possibly, yeah.
Because I'd have been on all the shows before.
Yeah, because certainly in the early days, I mean, some of the weeks I'd go to 3. I know in one week I went to Ipswich, Norwich, and Hammersmith all in the same week. So yeah,
I was certainly at all of those. So yeah, it's very
right,
possible you saw me there. Yeah,
right.
but yeah, no
No,
problem. It's been a pleasure.
no, I
I hope
really,
it
really
comes out all
appreciate
right.
it. Yes, yeah, I'm sure you will. I'm sure there'll be. I mean, I'll let you know what sort of responses. And obviously, funny enough, like you've said, you reply to people's requests, etc. I do my utmost when people make comments and they actually say my name. On the YouTube channel, I always try and make a response back. So thank you. It's been absolutely awesome. Look forward to my ticket to the Australian Pink Floyd.
A fair exchange, no robbery, Julian.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you so much.
All right, mate. No problems. No, stop.
No, shut up.